Good afternoon and welcome to today's Adweek webinar, the Programmatic Portfolio, Leveraging Capabilities Across Platforms. I'm Caroline Cakebread, Associate Editor of Adweek's Content Studio, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to take a few minutes to make sure everyone in our audience knows what to expect from today's webinar and that you're familiar with the features of our platform. Our presentation should go somewhere in the 40-minute range, after which we'll have time for audience Q&A. So if at any point you have a question for today's speaker, just use the Q&A tool on the left side of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can after the end of our formal presentation. It's not too late to invite your colleagues to join us. About 15 minutes ago, you should have received a final reminder email from us, and there you'll find a link to the webinar registration page that you can share with your colleagues. There's still plenty of time for them to join us live, but if they can't, today's webinar is being recorded and they can catch the on-demand version. In fact, we'll be sending you that recording later today when it's live. If you'd like a copy of today's slides, please go to the Event Resources tab on the left side of your screen. And finally, if you enjoy today's webinar, we urge you to check out the Adweek Webinars calendar at adweek.com/webinars. You'll see what we have coming up and also get access to our archive of on-demand webinars. So today, we're joined by Brian Kroll, the VP of Strategic Accounts at Adtaxi. We are thrilled to have him here. So Brian, I'll let you take it away with today's presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, everybody. My name is Brian Kroll. As Caroline mentioned, Vice President of Strategic Accounts at Adtaxi. I've been with Adtaxi since just after it formed in 2011, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area with my wife and 6-year-old son. Arjun here, but he has a knack for doing that as soon as I get him. But at any rate, if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's @RockandCroll. So here's kind of a brief agenda of what we're going to be going through today. Basically talk through a little bit about, what is programmatic or real-time bidding, how it's evolved. We'll spend some time on the platforms, and then really the most of the meat of this is going to focus on the capabilities and data and how we optimize. So we're going to breeze through the first part a little bit and then spend most of our time on the fun stuff. All right, so first section. So what is programmatic and how has it evolved? So quite simply, programmatic, it's basically mechanized ad buying, right? So we're taking digital advertising space automatically, basically using data to decide what to buy, what not to buy, and how much to pay for it. And it's pretty much done in real time, as you can see from this definition here. Essentially what we have is an omnipresent auction house where you have the supply side and the demand side, and in the middle it meets around exchanges. And you have basically on the left-hand side here, it's the flow of where ads and money, so advertisers bidding through ad servers and demand-side platforms. On the right-hand side, you have publishers and supply-side platforms, and they're meeting at the middle where you have bids and ad calls, and there's data flowing in across both sides. Typically from data providers, data management platforms, where they determine who we want to target and how we want to bid for various ad spaces. But essentially what this allows us to do is deliver the exact right ad to the right person at the right time, in the right place, on the right device, and using data, hopefully recency data, to make sure that we're doing something that gets our message across quite effectively and clearly. This is a big step where we are today from where we've come from, and I kind of like to use this slide just to give an example of how this all started. Back in 1994, this is kind of see in the upper right-hand corner here, was largely credited as the very first banner ad that ever ran, and it was ran on Hotwired, which was Wired Magazine's website back in the day. It was an ad for AT&T, and it clicked through to a microsite for multiple different museums across the world. And it's fascinating because this ad got, little omnipresent itself, or omniscient, I guess. Have you ever clicked your mouse right here? You will. It had about 40 to 50% click-through rate, and massive amount for that ad. And it's interesting because, and I bring this up, that really a lot of people, I think a big mistake people make in programmatic advertising is they still 100% value the click more than anything else. And, things changed in early 2000s when Google really indexed the internet and you could search for everything. You didn't even really click. You could basically find whatever you needed through searching. So big note from a performance standpoint here is that you want to make sure you're looking at how performance is measured, not just from clicks, but from views, But you can kind of see how everything has evolved here, and it went pretty crazily. Didn't even up to right now. I'd say we're probably in like Programmatic 2.0 or 3.0 with the evolution of CTV and text TV and programmatic audio. But it's grown like crazy. You can see sort of this chart here from eMarketer, how about 87.5% or so of all advertising is predicted to be programmatically traded here in 2021, which is still growing about 15% year over year from 2020. So it's not growing as fast as it was, but it's now the vast majority of how platforms are monetizing their inventory. When we talk about the different platforms of how we go ahead and use programmatic, largely going to be talking about real-time bidding platforms here, and not so much more on social or search, but that's basically what we're going to be talking about. And the way that we think about how everything should work together is it's really sort of like a symphony, right? So what we're trying to do is to create harmony. You have multiple different parts working together, different channels, potentially different platforms, but in together to create something beautiful from a marketing perspective. And if we want to talk about sort of like the first and foremost here, the original is still effective, right? So the original display banner, if we're talking about more cowbell, kind of way we look at it. There's massive amounts of different types of ad units. It's pretty much the ubiquitous, form of media that's out there, but it's still very central to performance and should be a part of pretty much like any well-rounded. The reason why we still like traditional display is it's incredibly affordable. It's great for brand building. It still works. It's something that has absolutely tremendous scale, and it has very powerful remarketing capabilities, if nothing else. Outside of display, another channel that we like a lot is native advertising. And so native advertising, if you're not familiar, it's sort of immersed with content, and it's dynamically sort of matching the look and feel of that site. And oftentimes what you will see would be sort of ads here that say sponsored content, and it kind of gives you an idea of sort of what you're looking at. But it's generally offering up an extension of content, and it's something where it gives the promise of not just where you can kind of learn and get an extension of content. It's a way to sort of deliver a message to a user by the promise of what they click through on the other side is to be something useful to them. One sort of study here, and I think this was done by IAB, but basically native is one of the more appealing forms of online advertising because it's not as annoying or intrusive as pop-up ads, and it's generally more appealing and interesting. So typically you get higher engagement from native ads than you would from just straight up traditional banners. Another platform would be pre-roll and mid-roll video. And one thing I really love about video is it allows you to sort of combine sight and sound and motion to elicit an emotional response from your target viewer. Video is something that's great when you can have multiple, different variable length videos. Shorter videos are really great for maintaining sort of brand recognition, sort of like your 15-second spots. You can have multiple different types of formats, skippable and non-skippable. I prefer video personally if it's in a pre-roll or mid-roll and not the in-banner video. I think it's sort of more of what the user is expecting, but one thing that's great about video is you can do sequential messaging to really tell a story. So once somebody has watched 100% of video 1, then you start serving up video 2, and so on and so forth. And also there's a lot that you can do now for some great brand safe placements within video too, outside of YouTube. This is talking about programmatic video across the greater web. The reason why we like it, it's a massive amount of reach. You can get some really great engagement, and something that really resonates with folks. You can choose your placement, so it doesn't have to just be pre-roll. Mid-roll is also an option too, depending on what you're targeting. And remarketing options also work really well with video too, and that's, I think, a great use for sequential messaging when we're talking about remarketing options with video. Programmatic audio is something that has grown pretty massively recently, sort of thinking about that as like streaming everywhere. You kind of see here from what we're looking at in terms of percentage of population, about 60% of the U.S. population, 12 plus, listened to online audio in the last week, according to 2019 data. And the hours listened in the last week is about 16 hours from 2019. So there's a massive amount of time spent here, lots of attention paid. And so we really like programmatic audio because it's something where even though someone's actively listening, they can be doing something else. And so, you can have a chance to put your ad message in there. And most of the time, they're non-skippable. Sometimes you get companion banners, which is nice. But it's something where people can be anywhere. So they could be having, listening to streaming audio in their car, and it's an opportunity to reach people during drive time. And it's also, it's still kind of in its infancy, and there's a lot of, inventory still popping up in places where we can advertise. And it's not just sort of the main channels, but also internet radio, et cetera. Probably my favorite out of what's emerging lately, and I think this is more important now than ever, is connected TV. And with connected TV, what you really get is the impact of the TV, but you get the precision of digital targeting. It's the same sight, sound, motion, and emotion response with video, but now it's really across multiple different mainstream platforms in the living room. And you see just some sample content owners and networks about the audience. We don't really think about it as like the specific device or show targeting, but really like sort of who do you want to reach or which living room or which actual device. But CTV is also in its infancy and growing. And you can kind of see here connected TV ad spending versus total spending. It's in 2019, CTV had about 37% growth, and the ad spending was about almost $7 billion, whereas on linear TV declined about 5% in overall viewership, but ad spend was about 44 billion. So it's about 15% of the spend, but a massive amount of the eyeballs. So there's a little bit of a disparity there. Great opportunity for folks to use streaming platforms and connected TV to really kind of double down on reaching that exact right audience with what you want to tell the individual household. Again, the reasons why we like it, it's that digital precision, right? You can choose exactly which audiences you choose, so little to no waste. Get the same level of production and authenticity that you would see in regular, marketing. Live event targeting is something that's happening more and more as people are streaming more and more live events. And then, it's still in its infancy, and more as more people are cutting the cord and as inventory is becoming more available, that's something where it just becomes a much better and more robust ecosystem in which to market. So after we kind of talked through all the platforms, if we sort of take a cue from music charts here, trying to get an idea of roughly like where does each platform generally fit. All of them work really well for awareness. All of them, I think, work really well for intent and consideration. Typically, we see displayed native ads, mainly from a remarketing standpoint, work really well if you're talking about lower funnel, just because of the cost and the scale. But CTV can work well for purchase as well. But it just kind of give you a general overall view. This is sort of how we like to think about where each platform should sort of sit in the overall funnel, from awareness to consideration to purchase. And again, we're talking about programmatic platforms only here. We're not really discounting the importance of search and social in the media mix, because those are incredibly important. But when we're talking about just programmatic, that's sort of how we sort of see where everything is in the funnel. So now let's get into the capabilities. And these are capabilities that really exist across all of the platforms that I've just been talking about. And the way that we sort of think about like targeting in different gradients for optimization, same way like a conductor would in conducting is in orchestra. You can have multiple different pieces playing their own part, but it comes together in harmony. So in terms of overall targeting, basically you have two main types, which would be first-party targeting and third-party targeting, and this is data targeting. So first-party targeting would be targeting data that you own. So people who have been to your website, or if you have a, let's say, an offline customer list that you wanted to upload, you can target those people as well. So that's your own first-party data. It's the most valuable that you have. And if you don't have a plan for how you're managing your first-party data, I'd strongly encourage you to make sure that that's a key priority for you here in 2020 and beyond. Outside of first-party data, then you have third-party data. And so third-party data would be essentially, what other websites or content providers have aggregated about specific individuals, whether it's through online form fills that folks have filled out, or profiles, or if you sign up for a service and you check that box that says that allow to third-party people for marketing purposes, et cetera. There's potential that now you're part of third-party targeting data, and there is an absolute massive amount of third-party targeting available. Pretty much anything you want to target is available in the ecosystem to target. It just depends on knowing who you want to really reach and what do you want to tell them and what do you want to do afterwards. But when you're thinking about targeting and remarketing to people, remarketing on other devices is something that can be done. First-party data targeting, and then also looking at like the household IP or cross-device targeting. So if someone has been to your website on their, on their top, there are multiple different providers that have done, basically cross-device targeting capabilities. And with those, you can basically sync up with their data and target other devices that are deterministically owned by the same user, and then serve ads to those folks that way. It's also great from a cross-device attribution standpoint too, in terms of how we measure the success. And then lookalike modeling. What lookalike modeling does is essentially takes your first-party data, so everything that we know in aggregate about the users that are on your website, and then looking at all of the different third-party data attributes that those users have, and then going out and finding more users that look like the third-party attributes. Really high correlation to your first-party targeting. So it's essentially us taking that first-party data, finding more people who look just like them using third-party data. And some examples of what's out there from a data perspective, demographically speaking, the standards, age, gender, education is out there, household dynamics, or there are kids in the home, or there are seniors in the home, types of income, types of employment, all of those things exist from a targeting or a suppression standpoint. I should mention here that you don't have to just target this data. You can also say, well, I know I'm really interested in reaching homeowners, so I want to target homeowners, but I also want to suppress people who I know are renters. Something like that could go into the audience development. Then there's also shopping and browsing habits. So whether someone's, like a dedicated online shopper, or let's say that someone's really into home decorating, or they're shopping for certain vehicles, or they're sort of first adopters for brand new tech. All of that exists from a third-party standpoint. Then you get into interest-based targeting. So what types of music do people like? Where are they showing intent for travel? What sort of sports do they like? Cooking, business interests, live event interests, all of that in there as well. Then you also have geographical targeting. So essentially, where somebody lives, approximately. If you have like direct IP targeting, that would be something we can actually target in actual households as well. Then you also have sort of like work, and it could be potentially like government or SIC codes. And then, how far typically somebody will typically travel to work. So are they commuting long distances or short distances? And then also, from an online shopping standpoint, geo-targeting, you can target down to the specific zip code, or even geofence targeting, where you can target very specific areas and just ping to all the devices that are pinging within there. So multiple different ways that we can target in terms of, to build campaigns. But ultimately, I kind of mentioned this briefly beforehand, since the beginning in Adtaxi, I've been advising everybody that if you want to build a solid campaign, you really have to start with just answering 3 questions, which is, who do you want to reach? What do you want to tell those people? And then what do you want those people to do? And that may be, one set of audience. You may have multiple different segments, but it's really kind of starting there and drilling those questions, and then you start building out robust campaigns and ad groups to be able to start mechanizing that process. And some of the ways that once you get your campaigns built, now talking, I think, about, once you get your audiences set up, how do we look at once we get the performance data in, how do we start optimizing? And one of sort of like the basic ways to optimize would be looking at how we use Dayparting as an optimization standpoint, right? So what you see here at the top sort of red, white, and blue graph, blue being the highest, red being the lowest, this shows for an e-commerce marketer where their sales were coming in from all traffic sources. It's just basically pulled from Google Analytics. So where their sales as a percentage of revenue by day part. And so you can kind of see that, looking at like 6 p.m. on a Monday at 1.25%, that's where most of their revenue is coming in. And so if you know that that's when most of your folks are out, it would make sense that you are doing your best to essentially be where your shoppers are when they're online, thinking about buying your products. So you can do that effectively by managing your bids so that you could still do all of the same targeting that we just talked about, but you're going to change how you bid based on the day part. And so this concept is called bid modifications. And so if anybody's familiar with search marketing, it's sort of like an enhanced where you want to bid higher on certain factors. This is just like an example in the lower right-hand corner there. If you had a $2 base bid, you'd modify it based on the percentages below to directly overlay on how people's shopping patterns were. And so this is just looking at like the 4 to 8 p.m. hours, but it's going to really fit the rest of it on the slide. But essentially, you'd want to bid higher at as much as a 0.65% or 65% higher than normal for that $2 base bids. You're talking about like a $3.15 base bid there. But you'd want to pull down on Saturday at 4 p.m. where you aren't getting as much. You'd want to actually decrease your bids by about. So you're talking about like $1.96 for a base bid, and this is all something that can be done where we're talking about the true programmatic or mechanization of ad buying, where you set this up and then you modify it based on data that comes back through. So it's a really effective way to basically still be there, but it's really about price versus performance when we think about programmatic advertising. You definitely are. It's an auction. You're bidding, so you might as well take full advantage of all the capabilities that you have within that bidding platform. Another way that's a great optimization is through device optimization. So if you know that by analyzing your analytics data that people convert a much higher rate on mobile or on desktop than they do, then you would want to bid. It's not to say we're not going to serve ads to folks on tablet. It's just that we would say in this instance, we're willing to pay $1.20 on the dollar for somebody who's on a PC because we know that those convert really well in this example, and we're willing to pay 78 cents on the dollar for somebody on a tablet. So we're still out there, we're still bidding, we're just, again, back to that price versus performance because of historical data on what we think is going to happen based on what has happened in the past. Another great optimization technique is what we call recency bidding. And recency bidding is something really a great tool where we found that as time goes by, once somebody's been on a website, the more time that goes by, the propensity to convert decreases. And if somebody was just on your website 2 hours ago and they're thinking about buying from you versus buying from somebody else, you really want to make sure that you're getting in front of that user and you're winning those bids, winning that auction for those really time sensitive and time critical minutes and hours there. So you might consider doing an increased bid of maybe it's 4 to 6x what you would normally pay for a very short time frame if that's when folks are converting, and then taper that off as you go out in recency. And this is something that can be done on both first-party data and on third-party data, which I think is also key. I think one of the things that's probably, if you talk about what's annoying about the original display banner ad is that, you just bought those shoes, but they still keep following you around, right? There's ways to fix that. and there's ways to choose how much to bid and how much to pay for that. You wouldn't want to just keep showing ads to somebody at the same rate and level if they had been on your website for 30 days. If you're just going to be wasting your money because they're not going to convert. So tapering off those bids in a centric way is incredibly powerful. You should also do on the frequency side. So we found that the first retargeting ad is typically more valuable than as you go down. So it's not just in terms of recency, but also in frequency. So really that first ad and the sooner the better. You want to pay more, but then taper it off. So you shouldn't be paying a static CPM for remarketing the more time somebody's been shown an ad, because in general, once you get past 7 or 8 impressions, depending on the person, they're probably not likely to convert, depending on who it is and what it is that you're selling. So using that bid modification is key there as well too. Some other things that can be done from targeting are, we talk about reaching folks at exactly the right time and the right place. Automatic targeting for weather. So you can, let's say if your business is dependent on the weather, whether it's snow or rain or sunshine, if you know that, if it's really sunny outside, that you're less likely to have people, coming into your stores, or vice versa, you could potentially have bid modifiers for your campaigns to say only run if this campaign, or only run this campaign message in these certain conditions based on the user's actual zip code weather. So that's something that can be done. Also, health conditions. Advertisers, pollen season, but it's not pollen season, across the entire country. As people are coming into spring, it's in different areas. In the Bay Area here, we've had, pollen. I've had allergies for the last couple of weeks, and it's sort of, different parts of the country are blooming at different times. But that's something that can be done dynamically, where you target based on whether it's like high pollen index or low pollen index, et cetera. So lots of things can be targeted dynamically, where you basically set it up and bid, and it's not something where a human has to go in and turn on and turn off based on all these different events that you want. You just have to plan ahead, essentially. Dynamic remarketing is another thing I think most people are probably familiar with, but great tool where, instead of building out individual ads based, you want to show somebody through each different page, you can set it up and just do it dynamically. So you can choose your creative basically on what you're going to show somebody based on where they've been in the website, or potentially what they've viewed. Maybe it's looking at, if you're an e-commerce retailer, multiple different products, you show them sort of like the last product they viewed and then other similar products. But multiple different options here. And we also like to change our bids based on, how somebody is acting on the site. So if it's just a homepage visitor, maybe you don't remarket to them at all. Maybe it's something where, I like to go for some level of engagement. So somebody who's homepage is probably looking at least 2 to 3 different page paths, into the website. So maybe it's just looking at the category page or something along those lines. But basically, increase your bids the closer you get to convert, to make sure that you're winning from a remarketing standpoint, and also make sure that you're showing the right messaging, right? You don't want to show the exact same ad that brought someone to the site with your remarketing ad. You basically want to envision, thinking about it from like a creative development standpoint. The first ad is, why should I care? And the second ad is probably, why should I buy from you, right? Or why should I buy this product as opposed to something else? So if it's really, thinking about how you're messaging somebody down the funnel, maybe you have different bids for checkout. Maybe if you want to offer up a coupon code or something like that, you don't have to do that recency bidding for just immediate. So say, all right, well, if somebody hasn't converted within 7 days, run a campaign from 7 to 10 days and offer up a 10% off discount code for those users, or something along those lines. So multiple different ways to mine the funnel and how you want to bid based on what somebody's doing on site. There's also value too. We have the thank you page. If there's a chance that somebody is going to, if depending on what you sell and depending on how your business works, if you depend a lot on lifetime value and on repeat purchases or upsell or cross sell, bidding or suppressing based on that data as well too from that final page is also key. You can choose to say like, okay, maybe somebody bought a TV and now you want to give them a sound bar or something like that, depending on what it is, that something that would be a compatible purchase. Great thing that can be done all dynamically based on where somebody is on your site once you just invest in that data layer. Speaking of data, I'm going to spend some time here now talking about what we're getting from all of these platforms, right? So there's a tremendous amount of performance data that is generated based on all of the different bids and actions that are happening, depending on how complex your campaigns are and ad sets. Creative, you can have multiple. It can get pretty complex pretty fast. But when we're talking about online event conversion tracking, it's still really largely the pixel. And so making sure that you have conversion pixels set up on your website at all the different places you want to track, not just the final purchase page, but also I find it's really valuable to sort of look at the user journey and see, all right, how are people interacting with the site through all the different ad groups, first touch, last touch, et cetera, all the way through the funnel. And so use that with pixels, right? So we typically like to map out 5 different conversion pixels per campaign ad set. It's consistent for the advertiser, but that way you can gauge from a prospecting campaign, where are people going? Are they making it to the product pages? Are they making it to the cart and then stopping there? Or from a remarketing campaign, are people coming back and just looking at a lot of product pages, are they buying, et cetera? All that information is very valuable, I think, to be passed back. And you can also do this, if it's not just with a website, there's tons of different app analytics where you can provide in-app conversion data. AppsFlyer is a great one that's integrated, I know, from a lot of different platforms, and multiple different ones you have to check with your specific app provider, but way to track that is also key, right? So you can pass back revenue, you can pass back the order ID from a purchase, you can pass back other information as well, potentially, depending on your platform. With our platform, we have that final pixel, so you can pass back up to 10 different pieces of information. So maybe it's, not PII or anything, but potentially like, okay, this was like this product category that this person purchased, or something along those lines. So anything that would be potentially of value or interest to know from a data and reporting perspective. But basically all this information is then used to calculate what's the price and performance piece, right? So what would it cost me to acquire that sale, or what was the true return on my investment, or ROAS, return on ad spend, for that? And that allows, on the trading side of things, us to adjust the bids based on that real-time performance information. In addition to online conversion tracking, offline conversion tracking is something that is also better and better over the last couple of years, and there's ways to track offline events as well. Probably the most popular, at least from real-time bidding right now, would be using geolocation measurement. So think of it as like a geofence where, there's a specific, like a polygon or shape around a specific store location, syncing up with different geolocation measurement partners like Factual, Placed, et cetera. You're able to basically see, if it's connected to the ad server, if any device that someone attributed to that user has been exposed to an ad, and then that person then wanders inside that specific location or set of locations, you can attribute that foot traffic back to ad exposure, and then that can be passed back into the platform and counted as a conversion. And if you have, let's say like you're a retailer and you know that, you get a 10% close rate of everybody who walks into your store, and your average sale is $400, and you would say, all right, well, I just want to attribute, basically like every conversion should count as $40, and that could be something from an extrapolation. You can't really tell if somebody bought or not, but it's a great way to sort of measure offline, or offline impact of your ads as well too. And a lot of these partners have, in my opinion, gotten a lot better. They do a great job at filtering out things like employees who work in stores, or devices that ping too much or too little within a store. You don't want to count the UPS guy or anything like that. So there's a great way to sort of measure not only on and offline impact, if you're talking about like a hybrid retailer who's doing e-com or in-store pickup, et cetera. So additional measurement grains, there's a ton of it out there, right? So you're looking at browser, served on, what are the ad formats, the device, geographic data, temperature buckets, viewability, full adjustment, etc. Tons of different data, first versus last impression. It's almost too much to handle. In fact, it probably is too much to handle unless you've got a ton of time on your hands in your data science. So essentially, how do you deal with all of this, right? So this is how we've dealt with it, and we basically built Quantum, which is our performance algorithm, based on display ad challenges back in the day, back in 2013. We originally called it Magellan, but essentially what we were doing is letting an algorithm monitor all of those things I just talked about, and then basically make budget recommendations across ad groups so that you can determining what your key objective is, that the budget can move across all the different ad groups effectively and deliver a net positive result, the best possible result that we can get within a specific budget. And so essentially what it's doing is it's analyzing that campaign performance and then making a recommendation to the trader based on what the objective would be, and then predicts essentially what the highest best case budget reallocation within platforms, campaigns, ad groups, etc. That the trader should use to get the highest value visitor to the site for the lowest cost. And it's not something where it's just like forget it. At Adtaxi, we really believe in the power of the combination of humans plus technology, because technology is great for doing math and humans are great for strategy, and that's where it's the intersection works out, I think, really well. And some examples that we kind of had here too, in a lot of the different platforms have their own specific sort of auto optimization features, and so we wanted to run some tests to kind of compare within these. Like for instance, like Facebook campaign budget optimization, how does that work versus Quantum? And you can kind of see in general here, what we see from improvement for sort of, strategic human thinking combined with the mechanization of, analysis and budget. So something that Adtaxi, and if you'd love to learn more, we'd love to chat with you afterwards. And just kind of give you a grand finale here, case study of roughly like how this has all worked. This is an advertiser that we work with where, obviously, like anybody else, their goal is more online sales or e-commerce retailer, but also a lower CPA, so that makes sense, right? So this is just some ideas of kind of like overall how we applied different strategies to both prospecting and remarketing. So thinking about users in sort of two different veins here. On the prospecting specific, it was really looking at custom audiences, frequent historical shoppers, and for competing retailers based on not just where data on online data for those folks, but also like where are they shopping, mobile location shopping, changing up the prospecting creative of multiple times so that you show sort of a weekly selection of sort of like the products or best sellers, sort of the why do we want to get in front of folks. Why should they care about this retailer? And then there was a of remarketing here where it was a really funneled approach and really tuned to get the best possible reach and maximize the total sales as possible per order. And see some of the optimizations here where increasing bids and decreasing frequency caps sort of each step down the funnel, really getting aggressive in the first 12 hours for that retargeting recency and then tapering off. We segmented target geographies into sort of different value zip codes based on historical purchase data, and then also the time of day and day, sort of mimicking the organic site visitation patterns, and then also looking through domain whitelist and blacklist for where we were seeing best conversion rates and where we were seeing poor conversion rates based on different domains of where the ads were serving. And the net result was pretty incredible. Of course, I'm not going to put a bad case study in here, but overall, it was a massive 74% increase in revenue from the current Q4 over the prior year, and ROAS almost doubled, and the CPA basically cut in half, about 49% decrease. So something that we're really proud of, and it really just kind of shows that it's not just sort of everything kind of coming together, right? If it all works the right way as a symphony, you have all your different instruments and the composition, and then you get a great performance. And the same thing happens if you can do a really, concerted effort at a programmatic campaign across all channels. together, and you can get some pretty tremendous marketing success that way. So I think that clock, which is exactly 40 minutes. And with that, I will turn it back over to Caroline for any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. That was awesome. So just a quick reminder for everyone here, if you have a question for Brian today, please ask it using the question tool on the left side of your screen. We're going to get to as many as we can over the next couple minutes here, but if we don't get to your question, we'll make sure it gets forwarded over to Brian and the Adtaxi team so they can reply to you offline. And there's a couple other reminders. Today's webinar has been recorded. Will be available on demand later this afternoon. We'll be sending out a link when it's live, so please feel free to share that. And if you want a copy of today's slides, you'll find a PDF in the event resources area at the top of your screen, so feel free to download that. All right, let's get to some questions here. Starting off, so if someone enters this person's site, can they retarget them on any of the platforms you were talking about, even CTV and programmatic audio?
Yes, great question. So remarketing is something that can be done across all those platforms. Essentially, the connected TV is through the household IP. So if somebody is, on your website on a desktop or a laptop, we can remarket to those people on the actual TV in the house by targeting essentially like that. Or they could be streaming connected TV on their laptop or on their mobile device as well, in sort of a full episode player. So yeah, that can be done. That's the same thing from an audio perspective, where you can remarket to folks who have been on your TV, but you can then remarket to them through programmatic audio. Yep.
Great, thanks. Let's see, this question is similar, asking if you can use weather targeting on any of the platforms you talked about.
Yes. So yes, that was something as well where you can target based on the actual user's zip code, any sort of like weather events, or as I mentioned earlier, whether it's like pollen or something like that, pollen levels. Yeah, you can absolutely do it so that if the current temperature, if it's snowing in someone's area, then you can absolutely put ads in front of them for based on that weather. Like if you're like let's say you're like a insurance company or something like that, you can change it up if there's like a hail or something along those lines.
Great. And let's see. So this person's asking about bid modifications, and they're wondering if there's a guide or any hard and fast rules to determine how much they should increase or decrease bids.
That's a great question. There really isn't a guide per se. The way that we typically approach it is through analysis. So you can kind of have a pretty good idea of like a starting bid modifiers out of the gates by analyzing like if it's a brand new campaign. Look at what data you can glean potentially from Google Analytics to look at potentially device bid modifiers or Daypart bid modifiers. Those things can be done sort of out of the gates, but then after that, I would say it's really more of a moving target where you want to try and evaluate the performance and of each ad group and campaign. So you wouldn't want to have it where you do the same bid modifications potentially across every single campaign. You might do it differently for prospecting versus remarketing. And it's really the goal is sort of let the data inform the decision. And I would advise not to go too crazy. We like to sort of advise like incremental adjustments as opposed to knee-jerk reactions. So think about it like steering a car. You don't want to just like yank on the wheel, otherwise you're gonna roll your car. So it's really more along navigating the road, so you have to steer it. But it's smaller adjustments as opposed to massive ones. Great question.
Great. Awesome. That's a good analogy with the car not wanting to yank on the steering wheel. Makes sense. Let's see. So we had a couple people here asking about cookies and what the best options are for audience building and the targeting you talked about when cookies are gone or phased out.
That is a great question. There are multiple different, I think, for sort of like unique identifiers across the board. I don't think there's been any, there's person-based targeting is going to be the best, but unique identifier for that person and those devices, that's going to be something that's ubiquitous. I think it's going to take some time, and I think there's still going to be probably some reliance on cookies. What's interesting is that, with the different platforms, the different browsers, making cookies essentially like by default not tracked, I think there's a lot of concern that it would impact advertising, but I think it's actually, Safari did it with ITP a couple of years ago. It started sort of making that default in their releases. And I think it's really about, cookie I think will be around for a while longer until there's a solution that sort of brings the best of all worlds to play for everybody. And, just me on my soapbox here a little bit, it's probably, cookies I think do have some value. I may not want to remember a single website password from some website, and sometimes it's a good thing from a user, and it helps, I think, from at least me personally. I want to see relevant ads. So until something, replaces that, I don't see them 100% yet, but could be wrong. Until then, I really I don't think they're sure. I think we're still a little ways away yet before knowing what the true answer is on that.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch just how everything plays out over the next couple of years. Let's see, this is kind of a fun one. What are you most excited about in the future of programmatic, or where do you see things moving forward?
I personally am most excited about the prospect of a unified multi-touch attribution system. And that kind of goes along with that unique identifier. Probably within everything I've just talked about today, everything that we can do on all of these platforms is unified attribution, because it's all run through the same platform and uses the same sort of cookies for counting. So it's not, there's no duplication there. But when you start factoring in search marketing and social and everything else that's out there organic, the multi-touch attribution, I think, is really the true holy grail. I kind of like to use the Wanamaker analogy of, 50% of the money I spend on advertising is wasted. I just don't know which 50%. I think that's probably if that can be solved for a lot of advertisers, even if just starting with the e-com space, but eventually looking at brick and mortar as well and offline, that's something I think that will be incredibly exciting. It's kind of the holy grail, I think, for everybody out there, and we're getting closer, which is pretty exciting.
Great, thank you. Let's see, this one, excuse me, a little more general, but when choosing between programmatic advertising platforms and providers, what factors should people be considering? Are there top 3 things you think they should be looking for?
Yeah, I think probably number 1 would be flexibility and control. So, something where the platforms, hopefully are transparent and give you all of the options and flexibility. If you're doing it yourself, like, if it's not like a managed service, but if you're talking about like, I'm actually going to go in and bid, I would say like, the control to do, whatever you want is probably number 1. Coupled behind on that, on the second, would be access and scale. So, having a platform with awesome controls but limited supply is not so great. So, you want to make sure as supply and decisioning ability as possible. So, the most potential supply side to match with that demand, I think, is key. And then I like, coming from the data side of the house, as much as you can get back in terms of data measurement grains, right? Is the decisioning on the front end is really only impactful if you have great and robust data on the back end that can help you fuel that decisioning. If it's kind of a black box on reporting, it gets a little tricky. But yeah, that's kind of probably my top 3 would be, like control and flexibility, scale, and data.
Great. Well, thanks so much. I'm going to wrap it up there. So I'd like to thank you again, Brian, for taking the time to give this presentation today. Really informative. I'm sure our audience feels the same way. Last reminders here, check your email for the link to the on-demand recording later. And again, yeah, thank you, Brian. We look forward to seeing everyone else on an upcoming Adweek webinar as well.
Thanks for having us.